The chamber smelled of recycled air and old tension, a combination that Ambassador Seraphine Okafor had learned to associate with the Galactic Council's worst days. She sat at the curved human delegation table, her dark hands folded over a datapad she hadn't looked at in 20 minutes, and watched the other species argue about humanity's fate as though she were not in the room. Above her, the 7 crystalline pillars of the Valdris Assembly Hall rotated slowly, refracting starlight into prismatic patterns across the faces of 17 alien species. It was meant to be beautiful, a symbol of unity. Today it felt like a stage set for a sentencing. "The motion is clear," said High Arbiter Quilindrix Voss, a Theran elder whose translucent skin pulsed with slow bioluminescence. His species communicated truth through light. Right now he glowed amber, diplomatic neutrality. The Galactic Council proposes to reclassify humanity under the Omega Stewardship Accord. They would retain their star systems, their autonomy of culture, but all military and technological development would require council review and approval. Murmurs cascaded around the hall. Seraphine did not move. Across the chamber, Commander Drevith Solon of the Karath hegemony leaned toward his microphone. The Karath were tall, insectoid, and had been humanity's loudest critics since humans first punched through the Veil Gate 40 years ago. "The Omega Accord is too generous," Drevith said, mandibles clicking rhythmically. "Humans have demonstrated consistent pattern deviation. They innovate outside approved parameters. Their last 3 ship designs contain drive configurations we had explicitly prohibited. Their colony on Thresh 4 developed atmospheric processors 20 years ahead of projected capacity. They are accelerating. They are thriving," said Ambassador Mirelle Dawnpath of the Aurelian Compact, her feathers fanning slightly in what served as a shrug among her people. "There is no law against." "There is a precedent," Drevith interrupted. "The Yethri. The Mondoval. Both species were permitted unmonitored development. Both became threats. The Council exists precisely to prevent another Mondoval event." Seraphine finally looked up. She met Drevith's compound eyes without blinking. "The Mondoval event." They always brought up the Mondoval event. 22,000 years ago, a species called the Mondoval had built weapons capable of sterilizing solar systems. They had used 3 of them before the old Council mobilized. 19 inhabited worlds. Gone. The Mondoval themselves were eradicated in response, their home star collapsed by cooperative effort. No one had seen weapons like that since. The Council had never recovered from the fear. Seraphine pressed the button to activate her speaker light, a soft blue glow indicating she wished to address the assembly. Quilindrix Voss acknowledged her with a nod. She stood. She was not tall by galactic standards, but she had learned long ago that stillness could substitute for height. "High Arbiter. Council members. Distinguished delegates." Her voice was steady. She had rehearsed this. She had rehearsed the alternative too. "I want to begin by acknowledging something that I think we all know but rarely say aloud. You are afraid of us." The amber in Quilindrix Voss's skin flickered briefly toward violet, surprise, before settling back. "Not because we have harmed you," Seraphine continued. "Not because we have threatened you. But because we don't slow down. We don't ask permission before we wonder. We don't wait for consensus before we imagine. You watched us go from wooden boats to warp-capable vessels in what amounts to an afternoon by galactic timescales, and it frightens you." Drevith's mandibles twitched. "Ambassador, the Council's concerns are rooted in data." "Yes." She smiled. It was a human expression that many species still found unsettling. "I've read your projections. In 200 years, human technological capacity may rival the Theran ascendancy. In 400 we may exceed it. In 1,000, well, your models don't agree past 1,000. She paused. "Neither do ours." A quiet fell over the chamber. "My government has asked me to negotiate. To find compromise language that preserves our dignity while accepting a degree of council oversight. I spent 11 months drafting proposals. I reviewed every version of the Omega Accord. I consulted with 47 human scholars, diplomats, and engineers." She picked up her datapad, held it up, then set it back down. "I'm not going to present any of it." The chamber stirred. Quilindrix Voss leaned forward. "Because the vote is already decided," Seraphine said quietly. "I've seen the pre-deliberation tallies. 11 in favor of Omega Accord. 4 abstaining. 2 opposed. You brought us here as a formality. A courtesy." Her voice remained gentle. "So I will extend one in return." She reached into the breast pocket of her jacket and produced a small silver envelope, a physical object rare in these halls. She set it on the table in front of Quilindrix Voss's camera relay. That contains humanity's response to the Omega Accord. It is not an appeal. It is not a counter-proposal. She smoothed her jacket. I'd ask that you read it before the vote is entered into the record. She sat back down. Quilindrix Voss stared at the envelope for a long moment. Then he gestured for a chamber assistant to retrieve it. The young Theron, skin flickering with nervous greens, crossed the floor and brought it back. Voss opened it carefully. He read. His bioluminescence shifted through colors Seraphine had never seen on him before, a rapid spectrum she couldn't interpret. He looked up. This says. He paused. This says humanity formally withdraws from the Galactic Council, effective upon conclusion of this session. Silence. It further states that all human diplomatic missions, relay stations, and trade representatives operating in Council-regulated space will be recalled within 90 days. His voice had lost its practiced evenness. And that humanity thanks the Council for 40 years of, and I quote, mostly good faith engagement. More silence. The kind that presses against eardrums. Drevith of the Kareth was the first to speak. This is a negotiating tactic. Seraphine looked at him. No. You cannot sustain independent operation. Your supply lines pass through Council space. Your medical exchange programs are being rerouted. She folded her hands again. We've been planning this for 3 years. Not because we wanted to. Because we watched the vote tally shift and we made contingency plans. That's what humans do, Commander. We plan for futures we hope won't happen. Morel Dawnpath of the Aurelian Compact had gone very still. Seraphine. If you leave the Council, there are no protections. No collective security guarantees. You would be alone in a galaxy that... That what? Seraphine asked. The gentleness in her voice had not changed. That might threaten us? She tilted her head. With respect, Ambassador Dawnpath, I think the Council just demonstrated how it handles species it finds threatening. Quilindrix Voss's skin had settled into a deep, slow indigo, the Theron color of grief. The vote has not yet been cast. We could. Please cast it, Seraphine said. As scheduled. We've already said goodbye. She reached down and pressed a small communicator badge. Somewhere far away on 17 ships positioned outside Valdris Station's jurisdiction, human engines began to warm. The vote was 11-4 with 2 abstentions. It was entered into the record at 14:32 station time. By 14:33, Ambassador Seraphine Okafor had walked out of the Valdris Assembly Hall without looking back. The chamber was silent for a very long time. In the corner, a junior Kareth analyst named Skretvul, who had spent 3 years studying human behavioral patterns, pulled up his threat assessment model and quietly updated it. The variables, he noted with something approaching genuine alarm, had all just changed. 93 days after the Valdris vote, a Kareth reconnaissance vessel, designated KHV Patience, arrived at the coordinates where the human relay station Meridian 7 had previously operated. What they found was nothing. Not debris, not signal shadow, not even the gravitational signature of anchoring equipment. The station was simply gone, packed up and carried away like furniture from a vacated apartment. Lieutenant Commander Skretvul stood at the observation window and looked at the empty space for a long time. He had been transferred to KHV Patience specifically for this survey mission. His threat assessment models had made him briefly famous in Kareth intelligence circles, and then immediately controversial when his summary report had concluded, in formal language, that the Council had made a catastrophic error. Nothing at Meridian 7, reported Sensor Chief Braxel from her station. Scanning for residual drive signatures. You won't find any, Skretvul said. Braxel looked at him. Sir? Human drives disperse signature within 60 hours. They've been gone for 89 days. He turned from the window. Pull up the survey list. How many of the 17 departure coordinates have we confirmed empty? Braxel checked. 14 confirmed empty. 2 we couldn't access, gravitational anomalies in those sectors. 1 we're en route to now. All empty, Skretvul said. Mark them all. He walked to his command chair and pulled up a star map. 40 years of human expansion in Council space rendered in soft blue light. Trade lanes, diplomatic corridors, joint research facilities, colony support routes. He overlaid the confirmed empty sites. Blue dots going dark one by one. Where did they go? Braxel asked. She wasn't being rhetorical. She genuinely wanted to know. Away, Skretvul said. That's the part nobody on the Council wanted to think about. We spent decades mapping where humans were. Nobody built serious models for where they might go if they left. He tried. For 3 years he'd quietly submitted proposals to the Kareth Strategic Intelligence Bureau requesting resources to map potential human withdrawal vectors. Uninhabited systems, uncharted sectors, the vast dark between Council claimed space and whatever lay beyond the outer veil. His proposals had been returned with polite rejections. The consensus was that humans would never leave. The Council was too valuable, too central, too necessary. Nobody had asked the humans. A soft chime from communications. Braxel answered, then looked at Skretvol with an expression that, even translated across species, clearly meant this is unusual. We're receiving a transmission, she said. Human origin. Encrypted with a standard diplomatic key, the old Council exchange protocol. Skretvol straightened. Source. Unregistered coordinates. Somewhere past the veil threshold. She paused. Sir, that's outside mapped space. He crossed to communications and authorized decryption. The message that resolved was audio only, a woman's voice he recognized immediately. Lieutenant Commander Skretvol, said Ambassador Seraphine Okafor. I hope this finds you well. I've been reading your assessment reports, the ones you submitted before Valdris. The ones that were rejected. A brief pause. We always notice things like that. Skretvol's mandibles were very still. I'm transmitting from a location your charts don't have a name for yet. We've been calling it Helix Drift. It has 4 habitable worlds, 2 of which needed only minor atmospheric adjustment. We moved the first population cohort 41 days ago. 18,000 people. They're doing well. Her tone was conversational, almost warm. I want to be clear that this message is not a provocation. It's a courtesy, the same one I extended at Valdris. We don't intend you harm. We don't intend the Council harm. We simply intend to build something of our own. Skretvol realized he had leaned forward without noticing. The Council will likely send more survey vessels. They'll find what you found, nothing where we used to be. They may interpret the silence as hostility. I'd ask you personally to offer the alternative interpretation. Her voice softened slightly. We left because we were going to be caged. We'd rather be alone than caged. That's not a threat. That's just a very human thing. The message ended. Braxel was staring at him. Should we report this to command? Yes, Skretvol said. Every word of it. He looked back at the star map. The blue dots were all dark now. And add a note from me. The Okafor transmission, that's what we'll call it, is evidence of exactly what I warned about. Humans are not hostile. They are not building weapons against us. He paused, choosing his words carefully. They are building something else entirely. And in my professional assessment, that is significantly more concerning. Braxel tilted her head. Why is thriving more concerning than hostility? Skretvol thought about the Mondova. About how the old Council had only mobilized after 19 worlds burned. About how fear in organizational bodies moved slower than capability. Because we know how to handle hostility, he said quietly. We've never had to handle being irrelevant. 3 weeks later, his report landed on the desk of High Arbiter Quilindrix Voss. The High Arbiter read it twice. His bioluminescence cycled through amber, indigo, and a color that had no name in the diplomatic spectrum, something his staff had never seen before, a deep, still gray that seemed less like a feeling and more like a reckoning. He called an emergency session of the Council's inner chamber. 12 delegates. No public record. The humans have not gone to ground, he said, setting Skretvol's report on the table. They have gone to expand. The Okafor transmission confirms they are establishing new infrastructure beyond Council-charted space at a pace our models did not predict. He looked around the table. I want to be clear about what this means. We passed the Omega Accord to slow them down. They responded by removing themselves from the environment in which slowing down was even possible. Dreveth Solon of the Kareth hegemony, who had until recently been the Council's loudest voice of caution regarding humanity, sat very quietly. His mandibles clicked once, softly. It was the sound he made when he was thinking something he didn't want to say aloud. Quilindrix Voss said it for him. We did not cage them. We accelerated them. The room was quiet. Outside, in the vast dark between stars, something was being built, world by world, station by station, in silence and with considerable patience, by a species that had just been handed the greatest gift the Council had ever accidentally given anyone. A reason to stop asking permission. Engineer Tomas Vesquez wiped red dust from his visor and looked out across the valley that, for months ago, had been an uninhabited bowl of ferric soil and thin wind. Now it held 12,000 square meters of pressurized greenhouse domes, 2 geothermal tap lines, a partially assembled rail hub, and the beginning of what would eventually become a skyline. He was 31 years old. He had been born on Earth, grown up in the Meridian Belt colonies, and spent 7 years as a drive systems engineer on Council trade route maintenance. Unglamorous work, largely invisible, involving long hours in cargo corridors calibrating engines that moved other people's goods between stars. Then the Valdres vote happened. Then Seraphine Okafor walked out of that hall. Then someone had forwarded him a recruitment transmission from the New Horizons Initiative, humanity's internal name for the withdrawal project. And he had put his name in within an hour. He hadn't hesitated. He'd surprised himself with how little he'd hesitated. Vasquez Ruiz. A voice crackled through his helmet comm, Dome 7 is showing pressure variance. Can you swing by? On my way, he said. He walked. The gravity here was 0.87 standard. Slightly lighter than Earth, noticeably lighter than the Meridian Belt. He'd already started noticing the difference in how he moved, the small adjustments his body was making. His colleague Dr. Priya Anantakrishnan, head of the colony's biomedical team, had said this was normal, that the human body's adaptability to gravitational variance remained one of its most underappreciated features. The Theron requires 6 months of acclimatization for anything below 0.95 standard, Priya had mentioned one evening over the colony's communal meal. The Aurelians can't tolerate above 1.1. The Kareth need controlled atmospheric composition or their secondary respiratory system misfires. She'd looked around the table, at humans eating food grown in alien soil, breathing processed alien air, building structures in alien wind. We've been here 4 months and half the survey team is already running without supplemental oxygen filtration. Tomas had thought about that a lot since. He reached Dome 7 and found the variance, a microseal issue on the secondary airlock coupling, straightforward fix. He worked in quiet, hands moving with practiced efficiency. Outside the dome's curved transparency, 2 of the world's moons were visible in the daylit sky, pale and close. His radio crackled again. Different voice this time, Administrator Yuki Tanaka-Obote, who ran New Carthage's logistics. General Colony Broadcast, Yuki said. We've received a priority message from Ambassador Okafor's office. Uploading to the colony network now. Summary, as of this morning Helix Drift's 4th settlement, Orizon on World 3, has reached minimal viability threshold. Full population intake begins next month. Cheers from somewhere in the dome cluster. Tomas smiled behind his visor. 4 worlds. 4 months. He thought about the Council's projections, the ones that had been leaked to human intelligence services 2 years before Valdres. The models that predicted human expansion would slow under the Omega Accords review requirements, that the review process would introduce delays long enough for other species to close the technological gap, that humanity would, in time, become simply one more managed member of an orderly galactic community. The models had been technically sound. They had simply made one foundational error. They assumed humans would accept the delays. 6 months into the withdrawal, a Theron academic named Professor Orvin Vell, the galaxy's foremost scholar of human behavioral history, published a paper that circulated quietly through Council research institutions and then, less quietly, through diplomatic channels. Its title was, The Valdres Inversion, on the Structural Incompatibility of Regulatory Architecture and Adversarial Ingenuity. Its thesis, stripped of academic language, was this. The Council had spent 40 years trying to understand humans by studying their outputs, their ships, their colonies, their diplomatic communications. It had almost entirely neglected to study their inputs, specifically, what conditions made humans stop innovating versus what conditions made them accelerate. Orvin Vell's research concluded that humans had a documented, reproducible response to perceived constraint. They redirected. Not rebellion. Not confrontation. Redirection. When the Meridian Belt colonies were denied expansion permits in their 3rd decade, they built upward, vertical arcologies that outstripped Council population density projections by a factor of 6. When human medical research was placed under joint review protocol after the Thresh 4 incident, human researchers had quietly shifted focus to veterinary and xenobiological medicine, fields not covered by the protocol, and had incidentally developed 3 treatments that later revolutionized interspecies medicine. When human drive engineers were told certain propulsion configurations were prohibited, they built the configurations anyway in smaller components and assembled them quietly at the edge of permitted tolerances. The pattern, Orvin Vell wrote, is consistent across 4 decades of data. Constraint does not stop human development. It shapes it. The question we failed to ask at Valdres was not, what happens if we restrict them? But rather, what happens if we restrict them and remove the environment in which restriction operates? The answer, he concluded with scholarly understatement, may require significant revision of our long-term strategic models. The paper was read by 11 council members. 8 of them filed it without response. 2 requested follow-up briefings. 1, Quilindrix Voss, called Orvin Vell directly and spoke with him for 4 hours. At the end of that conversation, Voss sat alone in his chambers for a long time. His bioluminescence had gone to the gray again, that nameless, uncharted color. He was thinking about something Seraphine Okafor had said at Valdres. We plan for futures we hope won't happen. He had thought at the time that it was a veiled threat. He understood now that it was a description. Humans hoped things would work out. They planned with complete seriousness for the version where they didn't. And then, if the bad version came, they were already moving. Not fleeing. Moving. There was a difference, and it had taken him 9 months to understand it. Fleeing was reactive. What Seraphine had done at Valdres was not reactive. It was preemptive. It was practiced. It was delivered with the quiet confidence of someone who had already, in all meaningful ways, arrived at the destination she was describing. Quilindrix Voss sent a message that evening. Encrypted. Personal. It was addressed to Ambassador Seraphine Okafor, at coordinates that weren't on any council chart. He asked if she would be willing to talk. He did not expect a quick reply. He got one within 6 hours. It said, yes. But not at Valdres. And then, because apparently Seraphine Okafor could not resist, we've built something rather nice out here. You should see it. Quilindrix Voss's gray bioluminescence, for the first time in months, shifted toward something warmer. The Theron diplomatic vessel Silver Resonance was the finest ship in the Ascendancy's civilian fleet, a craft of elegant swept lines and bioluminescent hull panels that pulsed with soft communications light in interstellar transit, visible from thousands of kilometers away. It was designed to project arrival. To announce, through its very existence, that someone important was approaching. High Arbiter Quilindrix Voss had chosen it deliberately. He stood at the observation deck as the ship crossed the veil threshold, the informal boundary beyond which council star charts became sparse, then speculative, then simply absent. The transition wasn't physical, there was no line in space. But there was a moment, unmistakable, when the familiar resolved into the unknown, when the stars stopped having council names. His aide, a young Theron named Isiravel, stood beside him with her data pad, running constant position checks against the coordinates Seraphine Okafor had provided in her reply. We should be within visual range in approximately 40 minutes, Isiravel said. Of what? Voss asked. Ambassador Okafor's message said to proceed to these coordinates and we would, quote, understand what she meant. Voss clasped his hands behind his back. He had spent 50 years in galactic diplomacy. He had attended the Treaty of Velen, negotiated the Aurelian Trade Compact's third revision, and presided over 11 formal admissions to the Galactic Council. He believed, with the quiet confidence of long experience, that he was not easily surprised. The Silver Resonance crossed into visual range of Helix Drift 42 minutes later. He was surprised. Not by one thing. By the accumulation of things. 4 worlds in a trinary star system. He'd expected that from the Okafor transmission. What he hadn't expected was the infrastructure. In 11 months, humanity had built a network of orbital stations connecting all 4 worlds, their lights visible even at approach distance. He hadn't expected the traffic, human vessels moving between worlds, between stations, in numbers that suggested not an outpost but a functioning civilization. He hadn't expected the drive signatures, some familiar, some using configurations his ship's database couldn't classify. He hadn't expected, when Silver Resonance made contact on the diplomatic frequency, to be answered immediately in clear Theron, not translated but spoken with the subtle light harmonics that Theron language used for emotional nuance embedded correctly in the audio representation. High Arbiter Voss. Welcome to Helix Drift. Please follow the beacon to orbital platform Serenova. Ambassador Okafor is expecting you. Isiravel looked at him. How do they know Theron harmonic language? They've apparently had 11 months, Voss said quietly. Seraphine Okafor met him at the docking arm of orbital platform Serenova wearing a simple dark jacket and the same unhurried expression she'd had at Valdres. The platform was large, larger than he'd anticipated, and behind her, through a transparent corridor wall, stars and the arc of a green-brown planet were framed like a painting. High Arbiter, she said. She did not bow. She extended her hand, the human greeting gesture. He had studied it and offered his own hand in return, which she shook with a brief, firm pressure. I'm glad you came. I appreciate the coordinates, he said. Your transmission said only that we would understand when we arrived. Did you? He paused. I understand more than I did. I'm not certain I understand everything yet. She smiled. That's honest. Come in. She led him and his small delegation through the platform's main corridor. It was warm, lit by full-spectrum light that mimicked planetary daylight. The walls held framed photographs, images of the 4 worlds at various stages of settlement, taken from orbit and from the ground. Human faces in work gear. Children in pressurized yards. You've been busy, Voss said. We had motivation. She glanced at him sideways. Also, it turns out that when you remove bureaucratic review requirements from an engineering culture, the engineers take it somewhat personally and produce remarkable things out of pure spite. Voss made a sound that his translator rendered as mild amusement. Is that the scientific explanation? It's Tomás Vázquez Ruiz's explanation. He's one of our lead engineers. He said it at a colony meeting and it got a standing ovation. They arrived at a conference room with a view of space. A simple room, round table, no hierarchy implied by the seating. Okafor sat. Voss sat across from her. Their respective aides settled at the edges. You sent the first message, Seraphine said. So I'll let you tell me why you're here. Quilindrix Voss's bioluminescence shifted to a slow, careful amber. Diplomatic truth light. The council made an error at Valdris. Not in its fears, those were genuine, but in its chosen response to those fears. He looked at his hands for a moment. We attempted to manage a species that does not respond to management by slowing down. We succeeded only in removing the friction that was, in retrospect, moderating your pace. Seraphine said nothing. She let him continue. I am here without a formal mandate, he said. This is not a council mission. 11 of the 17 delegates believe that reaching out to you legitimizes your withdrawal and sets a precedent for other species to exit without consequence. They are not wrong to think that. He paused. But I am less concerned with precedent than with what comes next. For you. For us. For the galactic community. What comes next? Seraphine repeated. That's the question. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then, we don't want war. I want to be clear about that. We did not leave to become an adversary. We have no territorial designs on council space. We want to build something of our own in our own way without oversight we didn't agree to. She met his eyes. But we're also not coming back. Not under the Omega Accord. Not under any version of it. I didn't come to ask you back, Voss said. That surprised her. Slightly. He caught it. Then what are you asking? I'm asking what the relationship looks like, he said. Between the Galactic Council and an independent human civilization beyond the Veil. Trade terms. Communication protocols. What happens when we encounter each other in the uncharted sectors that neither of us has claimed? He let a beat pass. And I'm asking with complete frankness, whether you are open to a relationship at all, or whether you prefer the silence. Seraphine looked at him for a long time. We walked out in silence, she said. That doesn't mean we wanted silence forever. It means we wanted to be heard. A brief pause. You're here. That's a form of hearing. Voss's bioluminescence warmed slightly. Then perhaps we begin there. She nodded. Perhaps we do. Outside the conference room window, the second moon of World 2 was rising over the planet's terminator. A slow, pale crescent moving against a field of unfamiliar stars. Quilindrix Voss watched it for a moment. It's very beautiful here, he said. And he meant it. Yes, Seraphine said. It is. There was something in her voice, quiet pride, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. We named that moon Patience. He looked at her. Because it took a while to get here, she said. But we got here. The chamber was fuller than it had been in 20 years. Not because there were more delegates. The Galactic Council's membership had not changed. It was fuller because of who was sitting in the observer gallery. A row of human representatives, 8 of them, led by a woman in a dark jacket who had, exactly 1 year ago, set a silver envelope on a table in this room and walked away. Seraphine Okafor sat in the observer gallery and watched the council prepare to do something it had never done in its 4,000-year history. Acknowledge it had been wrong. High Arbiter Quilindrix Voss stood at the assembly's central podium, his skin cycling through deliberate, formal gold, the light of official record and institutional truth. His voice was steady. 1 year ago, this council passed the Omega Accord and thereby catalyzed the withdrawal of humanity from the galactic community. In the 12 months since that withdrawal, the Council's Intelligence Committee has completed a comprehensive review of the strategic consequences. He paused. I will summarize those consequences, and I ask that delegates hear them without interruption. He had negotiated that condition personally. 3 of the 17 delegates had refused to agree. They were present anyway because attendance at full sessions was mandatory by Council charter. They sat with the rigid posture of people prepared to be unhappy for an extended period. In 12 months, Voss began, humanity has established 4 habitable worlds beyond the outer veil, with combined infrastructure exceeding what was projected for the next 40 years of Council-supervised development. They have registered 14 new drive configurations, 3 of which use physical principles our science teams are still reviewing. They have developed and deployed a deep space communications array operating on frequencies the Council did not know were navigable. They have made first contact with 2 previously unknown species in uncharted sectors. Peacefully, through what both species have since described to our observers as an encounter that was unusual for its patience and provision of immediate material aid. A murmur around the chamber. That last item was new information for most of the delegates. The humans, Voss said carefully, brought food. Someone in the gallery, a young Aurelian aide, made a soft involuntary sound of something between disbelief and appreciation. Both previously unknown species have since established communication links with human settlements and have indicated interest in broader dialogue with the galactic community. Voss looked up from his notes. Dialogue facilitated by humans, who are no longer members of this council. The chamber was very quiet. I will now turn to the assessment framework the Intelligence Committee used in evaluating these developments. He advanced his datapad. The framework was authored by Lieutenant Commander Skretvol Drevathanix of the Kareth Strategic Intelligence Bureau, who some of you will recognize as the analyst who submitted 3 consecutive rejected proposals at this council requesting resources to model human withdrawal scenarios. He has been promoted twice in the past year. Across the chamber, Commander Drevath Solon of the Kareth Hegemony, Skretvol's former superior and the council's most vocal critic of humanity, sat with his mandibles completely still. Skretvol himself was not present. He was currently embedded with a Kareth observation team near Helix Drift, filing dispatches that were, by all accounts, more interesting to read than anything the Kareth Intelligence Bureau had produced in a decade. Voss continued reading. The assessment's core finding was this: humanity's worst-case trajectory under unrestricted independent development remained a threat variable, as it had always been. But the comparison case, humanity under Omega Accord supervision, now appeared, in retrospect, to have carried a different and arguably greater risk. The accumulation of human resentment in an environment of constrained ingenuity, producing a civilization that was simultaneously slower in development, more internally frustrated, and more likely to view the Council as an adversary. The Omega Accord, Skretvol had written in his characteristic blunt style, was designed to prevent the Mondoval scenario. Based on documented human behavioral patterns, it was structurally more likely to produce it. Drevath Solon's mandibles clicked once. The Intelligence Committee's recommendation, Voss said, is as follows. The Council should pursue a formal treaty of mutual acknowledgement with the independent human civilization, establishing non-interference covenants, trade protocols, and a joint communication framework for encounters in uncharted sectors. This treaty should explicitly recognize human sovereignty beyond the veil threshold without qualification or oversight provisions. He looked up. And the Council should, in its formal record, acknowledge that the Omega Accord was a strategic error, not in intent but in design. He set down the datapad. This is the hardest thing this body has been asked to do in my tenure, he said simply. Not because it requires sacrifice, but because it requires honesty. The vote took 40 minutes of deliberation. It passed 9-6 with 2 abstentions, a smaller margin than the Omega Accord itself, but a margin. It was entered into the record at 11:17 station time. Afterward, in a small anteroom off the main chamber, Quilindrix Voss sat with Seraphine Okafor and 2 cups of something warm that a Theran aide had produced from somewhere. The liquid glowed faintly. Voss had learned that this was normal for Theran beverages, bioluminescent fermentation. Seraphine sipped it without apparent concern. 9-6, she said. Yes. 3 of those 6 voted against the Omega Accord a year ago. Yes. He allowed himself a brief, tired expression. Progress moves at its own pace. She was quiet for a moment. The two new species, the ones we found beyond the veil. Their names in their own languages are unpronounceable in any council tongue, but they've accepted the transliterations Fenori and Kellam. They're different from each other. Different from us. She looked at her cup. They were both surprised that we came without a flag-planting agenda. What did they expect? What they'd seen from the one council scouting expedition that had previously entered those sectors about 80 years ago, she said. Which apparently left without making contact at all. Flew in, catalogued the star system, transmitted its findings back and left. She glanced at him. No one said hello. Voss was quiet. We said hello, Seraphine said. We sat with them for 3 days. Priya Anantakrishnan ran a basic medical screening on the Fenori delegation that identified a mineral deficiency affecting their agricultural yield, something curable with a simple soil amendment. We gave them the amendment and instructions. That was it. She shrugged, the human gesture, the one that said it was small but real. That's why they're interested in talking to us. And to the council, through you. Potentially. She met his eyes. If the council decides it would like to do something with that introduction. He held her gaze. Is that an offer? It's an observation. What you do with it is your business. She set down her cup. We didn't leave because we hated the council, Voss. I want you to understand that. We left because the council was going to make it impossible for us to be what we are. And what we are, she paused, searching for the right words, is inconveniently, incurably interested in what's out there. He looked at her for a long moment. The council's worst fear, he said slowly, was that you would become powerful enough to threaten the established order. I know. I think the actual worst fear, the one no one articulated because we didn't have language for it, was different. He looked toward the small window in the anteroom wall, at the stars visible in the gap between Valdra Station's structural arms. The actual worst fear was that you would leave and be fine. That you didn't need us. That the architecture we'd spent 4,000 years building was not the inevitable shape of galactic civilization, but simply one option among many. He paused. And that humans would go off and demonstrate what the other options looked like. Seraphine was quiet for a moment. Are you fine? He asked. Not the High Arbiter. The man. She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. We're early, she said. Helix drift is real but it's new. There's a lot that could go wrong. 4 worlds sounds like a lot but it's not, by galactic standards. She tilted her head. We're a sketch of something that doesn't exist yet. But you're building it. Yes. The quiet pride again. We're building it. Outside, on the assembly floor, delegates were filing out. Some were already sending transmissions to their home governments. In 6 months, 3 council species would submit formal requests to the human settlements for observer status at joint research ventures. In a year, the first Kellam delegation would arrive at Helix Drift for a meeting that would eventually produce the Outer Veil Compact. A treaty signed by humanity, the Fenori, the Kellam, and 4 other species who hadn't existed in any council database until humans went out and said hello. None of that was known yet. What was known in that anteroom was this. 2 people who had sat on opposite sides of a vote about fear had found their way to a table where they could talk about something else. Quilindrix Voss picked up his cup of glowing Theron tea. To the sketch, he said. Seraphine Okafor picked up hers. To whatever it becomes, she replied. Outside Valdra Station the stars did what stars do. They shone. They waited. They made no judgments about who was ready.